Hello, my name is Mr.Reyes, and I'm beginning my first year teaching sixth grade English here in San Antonio. During my student-teacher experience, I observed some concerning classroom management approaches that I want to make sure I don't repeat. Today, I'd like to share how I plan to create a cultural response to support a classroom environment that addresses challenging behaviors through evidence-based strategies rather than disciplinary measures. The problem is, during my student teaching, I witnessed two black male students, Brian and Corey, being labeled as problem students and referred for special education evaluations without actually intervention attempts first. This reflections a pattern of disproportionate we know that exists in special education. Black students, particularly black boys, are overrepresented in emotional and behavioral disorder categories, often due to their culture, misunderstanding, and implications bias rather than actual disabilities. So my cultural responsive approach is, as I begin a new school year where 70% of my students are black, I'm committed to a cultural responsive approach. First, I'll examine my own bias and recognize that behaviors I might perceive disruptive could be a cultural communication style or a response to an unwelcoming classroom. Instead of immediately viewing them as defiant or problematic, I'll seek to understand their function and context between them. Ooh, that was a lot. Ensuring the least restrictive environment. It is critical to remember that IDEA mandates non-discriminating evaluations and placements in at least restrictive environment referring to students to special education without first implementing a document classroom intervention violates these principles and that contributes to disproportionary before any referrals. I need evidence that the student has received appropriate cultural responsive instructions and behaviors that support in the general education setting. I would also build relationships and communications. So before considering any special education referrals, I would implement a multi-tiered system of support. This means starting with high quality classroom instruction for all my students, then providing targeted intervention for those who need additional support, and documentation is the most effectiveness for these interventions over time. I've also prioritize building authentic relationships with families rather than only calling home to report problems. I would establish positive connection first, early on in the year, and then maintain regular strength-based communication. For families who are hard to reach, I tried multiple methods, notes, home, emails, texts, or even home visits, if appropriate. I would approach these conversations with a cultural, demilitarized recognition that these families know their children better. They know them better than I do. Um, so specific strategies for Braden. For students like Braden who call out and seek attention, I would implement several evidence-based strategies. First, I would establish a clear constant classroom expectations that are taught explicitly and practiced regularly, not just on the poster or on the wall. I would use a positive behavior intervention and supports, or PBIS, to reinforce desirous behaviors rather than punishing the undesired ones. For Corey, my strategies are for Corey, who withdraw and refuse to engage. My approach would be completely different. His behavior suggests maybe anxiety, trauma, or needs for alternative ways to process information instead of correcting his drawings or as off-task behavior. I recognize it might be helping him focus or regulate his own emotions. So I would use different instructions that allow students choice and multiple means of expression. My least restrictive environment is that I know it is crucial to remember that IDEA mandates non-discrimination, evaluation, and placement in a least restrictive environment referring students to special education without first implementing and documenting classroom intervention violates these principles and contributes to disproportionately. Before any referrals, I need evidence that the student has received appropriate cultural responsive instructions, behavior supports in the general education setting. My goal is to create a classroom where all students feel valued, understood, and supported by implementing evidence-based practices, building strong relationships, and examining my own bias. I can address challenge behaviors effectively while ensuring equality for all my students, particularly my Black male students who have historically been marginalized in education.